I'd like to begin by connecting to the words of young 17-year-old Tom in yesterday's session, who said something that reminded me of myself. "Don't sign up and get killed," Tom said. "When I was 19 years old, I was horrified by the Vietnam War. The My Lai massacre and the brutality of so-called participating democracies angered me. When the US National Guard fired 67 bullets on peaceful protesters in Kent State University, killing 4 students and wounding 9 others, I was radicalised. And here in Australia, our government was imprisoning those who defied the Conscription Act, as I was about to find out. 3 days after my 20th birthday, I was arrested for handing out leaflets at a Draft Resisters Union demonstration outside Melbourne GPO. And I was charged with incitement and faced 2 years in prison. The leaflet had a dangerous message: don't register for national service. This was a lesson in the power of words. In the days that followed, as I awaited trial, I asked my father if he had ever killed anyone during World War II, as he had never spoken about it. Soberly, reluctantly, he told of being in a forest. He and an enemy soldier saw each other simultaneously and both raised their rifles to shoot. My father fired first. He must have been a split second away from being shot himself. I sensed his trauma of reliving the moment, a shameful, regretful moment that he never spoke about again. Wars have many victims, those who are killed or maimed, and those who kill and maim. Their lives will never be the same. They pass on the trauma, and every victim has a mother or father, or a brother or sister, a friend or a lover, a child or many, and they too are all victims. And then there are more victims of war, those who try to stop it, resist it, end it, and expose war crimes to hold perpetrators to account. People like Julian Assange and David McBride. But it is Julian that I'm speaking about at the moment, and I'd like to give you a brief update. His defence has applied for permission to appeal the decision to extradite him to face charges in the US that could imprison him for 175 years. If allowed to appeal, the appeal itself will take years more in court. Punishment by process. The grounds for appeal are largely centred around the political nature of the case, and I'd like to say a few things about that. Julian's lawyer, Jennifer Robinson, and wife and lawyer, Stella Assange, have both recently expressed their belief that only a political solution will free Julian. After all, this is a purely political case. And so PEN has begun an initiative that I would like to tell you about. On Thursday, this coming Thursday, we've organised a meeting with 7 MPs in Parliament House to put a proposal to them. Keep in mind the extradition treaty between the government of the US and the government of the UK, Article 4, Item 1 says, extradition shall not be granted if the offence for which extradition is requested is a political offence. This is the Australian PEN proposal that we will be asking the members of Parliament that we're meeting with. We're asking for a member of the Parliament to put the following motion to the Parliament and to request a conscience vote. This is the motion. The treatment of Julian Assange has not been normal. It is extreme, illegal, denies his human rights, and is threatening his life. The legal process is being used as punishment. The political nature of the charges and illegal activities by UK and US authorities are grounds for his immediate release and for dismissing the extradition request. The Australian Parliament therefore calls for the immediate release of Julian Assange and the denial of the extradition request. I'd like to invite, without notice, that this conference makes a similar call. We will publish on PEN websites the vote of each member of Parliament when it comes, if we can get this to happen. And prior to the motion, a document will be sent to all MPs and senators and circulated publicly. So I'd like to just mention a few of the points that will be in this document. It's all about making the case of why Julian Assange's case is political. A few months ago, George Brandis, former ambassador in London, expressed on Q&A, you may have seen this, that he had full confidence in the due process of the British legal proceedings, and that the consular assistance that Julian was receiving was the same as for any other prisoner. Really? Any other prisoner? Do you know any other prisoner who has been treated like Julian Assange? I would challenge anyone. Doctors for Assange, a worldwide organisation representing 354 doctors, and Nils Melzer, the UN Special Rapporteur on Torture, condemn the torture, denial of healthcare, and violations of Assange's right to doctor-patient confidentiality. They describe it as politics and state interference. A few examples from Nils Melzer's book, The Trial of Julian Assange. Immediately after his arrest in April 2019, Assange had requested the allocation of a laptop so he could read the court files and draft notes and statements for his own defence. The request was not granted until 10 months later, after the extradition hearing had already well and truly begun. And even when he was finally given the laptop, the keyboard had been blocked with glue to prevent him from typing. At another hearing, when Julian's health had become quite critical, the judge turned to Assange, ordered him to stand, and asks him whether he understood the proceedings. He was very ill at the time. He replied in the negative, says that he cannot think, and he appeared disoriented. Then he said, "I do not understand how this process is equitable. This superpower, the US, had 10 years to prepare this case, and I can't even access my writings. It is very difficult where I am in the harsh conditions of the prison where he's being kept, Belmarsh, to do anything. These people, the US, have unlimited resources. Personally, I feel ashamed how the Australian government has allowed this mistreatment to continue and to continue and to continue. And I'm afraid to say there aren't any positive signs that it's not still continuing." And there was worse. During the extradition hearing at Westminster Magistrates Court in September of 2020, which lasted several weeks, 3 of the few available public seats in the courtroom had been reserved for diplomatic representatives from the Australian High Commission in London. Now, the courtroom, because this is such a controversial case, the courtroom had been packed and there were queues outside, people trying to get in. And the 3 seats that had been reserved for the Australian consular representatives remained empty every single day. They did not turn up one day. Now, that is an absolute disgrace. I was talking to John Shipton last night and about this point, and he says, no, they didn't attend deliberately so that they could say they have no knowledge of mistreatment. And it got even worse. During the first extradition hearing this February, Assange was confined to a glass box in the court. They decided for some reason, he's been in the court before, but they've decided, like a new thing that they decided, that he needs to be restricted by a glass box. He can't sit with his lawyers. Is he Osama bin Laden? He's never been charged with anything of a violent nature. He's been in the court before. Why was he suddenly subjected to this? His confidentiality with his lawyers has been highly compromised by spying and restricted by harsh Belmarsh limitations. This demeaning abuse and denial of confidential access to his defence lawyers is inexplicable by anything other than it is political persecution. On a few occasions, he had to get down on his knees and speak loudly between gaps in the glass in order to communicate with his lawyers, and all of this was within earshot of the nearby prosecution lawyers. The admission by the UK government recently that its surveillance and information sharing arrangements with the US, it violated Julian Assange's lawyer Jennifer Robinson's rights. They've paid out. This is fact. They are guilty of violating the confidentiality of Julian Assange and his lawyers. And there are numerous cases about this happening now in the US. The CIA and Trump had been making explicit plans, not just to kidnap and poison Julian, to rendition Julian and even to assassinate him while he was in the embassy. And it beggars belief that the prosecution is by the same agency that has plotted against the defendant. What sort of a trial is this? It's also a politically motivated prosecution because depending on who sits in the White House, Julian gets prosecuted or he doesn't. Under Obama, there was a decision by the Department of Justice to not prosecute Julian for the Manning leaks. It was announced by the Department of Justice spokesperson, Matthew Miller, who said, there is no way to prosecute WikiLeaks in the Manning case without setting a precedent for the rest of the press. He also said Julian Assange is not a hacker. He is a publisher, and we can't go after him for that reason. This conclusion was reached after the Manning court-martial, after all the evidence had been heard. Then the Trump administration came in, reversed the decision with the 1917 Espionage Act. And the offences under this Act are political offences by definition. And even the UK-US extradition treaty explicitly, as I read before, in Article 4, prohibits extraditions for political offences. So Julian's arrest for breaking bail, his sentence of 11 months for breaking bail, and his continued imprisonment after that, this all constitutes political interference. Julian's exercise of his right to seek and to actually obtain asylum is enshrined in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, a long recognised right every person has. Going into the embassy should have been a sufficient defence to not even have been convicted of the violation of the Act. This violation is rarely punished when this happens. You know, in the precedents, it's rarely even punished. On occasions, it's punished with a fine, but rarely has it ever been punished with prison time, far less, 11 months, and a continuation of that for going on now to 4 years. It is an absolute disgrace. I think I've probably run over my time, so I'm sorry, but yeah, there's a lot to say. Thanks very much.